Hey everybody, we want to welcome you to another edition of Life Minutes. We've been doing these now for over a year, and we are so glad that you've joined us. Over the next few Life Minutes at least, we're going to be taking a journey into the Old Testament, into the book of Psalms. We're going to look at some of the different Psalms that are located there, and we're going to learn some things that I think are very practical for us. There's no doubt that you know that we live in unprecedented times. For many, their jobs, their social life, their church life, really much of everything has been derailed to a point. One of the good things that we can do at Oakridge is that we can live stream our services on Sunday, something we regularly do. And even during these times when we are not open for, quote, business on Sunday morning, per se, of having our church, having folks here. We want to continue encouraging you by live streaming our services. And we always want to make sure that we focus on God's Word and what He has to say, especially, I guess you could say, during this time, as we're all navigating through things that are going on. We live in a rapidly changing world because of this COVID-19, the coronavirus situation. But as we begin, and I say this more as a reminder to myself, that I have to always remember, God is not caught off guard by what's happening. Throughout history, even His church has endured some very difficult times, from persecution to the, believe it or not, the Black Plague of the Middle Ages, to other times in which the church has gone through just some difficult times, and that means His people, God's children. It hasn't always been easy, but God's church has prevailed and continues to. Jesus said that He would build His church, and nothing would stop that from happening. And so I want us to always keep in mind that God knows exactly what's happening. He's aware of the current situation in our world. Nothing catches Him off guard. And so beginning today in this Life Minutes video and in next week's video, we're going to look at Psalm 4. Psalm 4 is written by King David. If we could put it this way, this psalm actually does talk about handling fears and pressures that we face. We could even say that David is feeling, quote, painted into a corner. We don't really know exactly what the background is to this psalm. When you read the psalm, there's a couple of thoughts. There's the one thought that Absalom, David's son, has rebelled against his father. Absalom wants the kingdom for himself. We read about that in the Old Testament. And he is going to do what is necessary to become the king of Israel, even if it means taking the life of his father David. He's trying to drive him out of the kingdom. Not only could we say, as Absalom basically declaring war on David, but beyond that, it wasn't just a physical attack. There was a smear campaign. There were things being done to try to discredit David and get the people to turn against him. And that's one thought of what is behind David penning this psalm. And the other background that some people think is the reason behind this particular fourth psalm is that Israel is in the midst of some famine, some drought. And what has happened is that many of the people of Israel, instead of turning to God for help and dependency during that difficult time in the land, they started worshiping false gods. So there's a couple of different thoughts behind why did David write this. We know it's God's word. God led David to write it. I think when we read verse 2, you'll see, really, I think that'll tell us more of the background to this psalm. There are three things that David shares with us of how we should handle fear. And we're going to look at the first one today and the next two. things that he mentions in our next Life Minutes. And so let me read to you verses 1 and 2 of this psalm, and then we're going to make our first point of what do we do when situations seem so overwhelming that we begin to be overcome by fear, anxiety, frustrations. We don't know where to turn. We don't feel like there's any, maybe we know that God is in control, but we're really struggling with it. I want to try to just encourage us and keep us focused on what is the answer, shall I say, to all that we are going through in our life right now. Psalm 4, verse 1. Here's David's cry out to God. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. Let me stop and read just again. Let me read verse 1. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. The first thing that David tells us, and I want to explain this so it doesn't sound trite or too simplistic. But you know what David says? He says, here's the first thing that I needed to do. When I started to become overcome by fear because of what is happening in my life, David says, I have to, instead of allowing the fear to overcome me, I have to confront the situation. What often happens is we allow the situation to take control of our emotions, of our thinking, of our feelings, and David says, no. And though I don't want it to sound simplistic, the first thing that David tells us to do is that, and what he did was, he, instead of looking around at the situation, he turned back to the one who, throughout his life, had helped him at other times. The one that he knew that he could put his faith in to help him as he navigated a very difficult time in his life. He anchored himself in God as his helper. And one of the things that he does when he says that is that immediately he responds with the statement, God, you've given me relief. I've experienced you freeing me. I've experienced you helping me when I was in tight places before, when I was in distress, when I was uncertain, and fears and worries and pressures were beginning to come upon me. The first thing David did is immediately he went to God and he basically cried out to God, God, I can't handle this on my own. I know you've helped me before. I need you to help me again. And he spent time thinking about the times that God has been there for him. Every one of us, regardless of what is happening in our world today, God has been there for you. If you're a believer, you've seen God do things in your life at other times. What makes us think he won't be there to help us now? Instead of living in fear, instead of panicking when we're confronting a situation or like a situation is confronting us, let's go to God. That's what David did. He alone can help us. And we need to think about who God is. David, you are the God of my righteousness. You are a righteous, holy God who has done things in my life, David says. And you're a God of grace. Be gracious to me. Hear my prayer. Let me say one more thing before we close this Life Minute video. In verse 2, this is where I think we get our explanation of what David is dealing with. Listen to this. Verse 2. O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? I think that probably, even though, I can't say this for sure. I think David was dealing with issues with Absalom, his son, and those that were on Absalom's side that were trying to destroy David's character. If he was talking about the nation of Israel, when he talked about seeking after lies, he would have in mind that the people of Israel, instead of turning to God in a difficult time, were trying to figure it out on their own. And were turning to false gods to somehow pull them through. Sometimes things hit us in waves. David talks like people have been trying to undercut his honor. It was just happening over and over again. But the one thing that David didn't do in this psalm, he didn't attack what these people, and he never lowered himself to their standards. I've read things on Facebook and in the media, so have you. Everyone's got their opinion on what is happening in our world today. And I've seen some people handle things not very graciously or kindly just because they disagreed. But I'm not going to attack people. Well, what good would that do? Don't lower ourselves to getting into all of that. What we need to do, and if you're a follower of Christ, this is the most important thing. Don't let fear grasp us. Tackle it. Turn to the only one who can help us. And the reason why you know he can help us, we know he can help us because he's helped us before. And because he is the all-powerful, all-knowing, unchanging God. Nothing is catching him off guard. Next week, we're going to talk about a couple of other things that David tells us here from this psalm about dealing with fear and pressure. Until then, this is Scott from Oakridge. Hang in there. God is great.